Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Mike Anderson. My guest this week is Andy Dingus, waterfowl biologist here at Game and Fish. Today we're going to talk about the Spring Light Goose Conservation Order. Why was the conservation order put in place, Andy?
Well, really, it was put in place, Mike, just to reduce the numbers of light geese. So the conservation order is basically just extra days that we're allowed to harvest geese outside of our normal migratory game bird treaty days.
Andy, how did the snow goose population get to these levels? I mean, how did the population get so big?
Well, it's really a combination of factors. One is we've changed the landscape, especially in the lower 48. We really got a lot of agriculture on the landscape right now. So the snow geese have adapted to use those resources, and essentially they've really increased their survival during the wintering time period. So, with that, there's more and more geese that are heading north every year to breed. So, really, that's helped out dramatically to increase their populations.
Andy, why do we need to reduce the snow goose population?
Well, snow geese have really grown exponentially from the mid-90s up to the early 2000s. The big problem is they nest in colonies, so they nest in high densities in their Arctic breeding habitat. And with that, they need a lot of food resources to kind of support those populations. And Canada geese will go and graze vegetation. Snow geese actually grub, so they'll pull the vegetation out of the soil.
So they're basically ruining their habitat.
Yeah, they grub that vegetation, and then coupled with a short growing season in those habitats, it really takes a long time for those things to rejuvenate and recover. So we're really left with a lot of that breeding habitat's just kind of barren, and we really don't know how long that's going to take to recover. So the season's really designed to kind of reduce the numbers of light geese, to kind of reduce that habitat destruction on the tundra. So.
Or the population stabilizing?
In recent years, yeah, it looks like, according to some of the banding information we have, the population has kind of stabilized. So the conservation order really, in effect, is kind of helped reduce some of those initial growth rates. Time will tell if we're actually going to be able to reduce the population size with the conservation order, but certainly it looks like, it's helped kind of curb some of those growth rates.
When does the conservation order start in North Dakota?
In North Dakota, it's open on February 17th this year. It's going to start a little bit earlier in those southern states, but typically we're probably not going to see any birds until that mid-March to late March period. But last year we did have some birds showing up in late February in the southeast part of the state where we didn't have as much snowfall.
What determines when they get here?
Well, it's highly dependent on weather. A lot of that, too, is just the snowpack that we have. This year, we just don't have much snow in the northern Great Plains. We're looking at maybe, 5 to 10 inches kind of on a belt, in northern Nebraska to northern Iowa, southern Minnesota through the Dakotas. So, really that's really not much snow. It'll probably take a couple days to burn off once we kind of get some warmer weather. So, I mean, I would kind of expect it to be, just given what we're looking at now, probably be a pretty early migration this year, but, things can change in a hurry if we get a heavy snowfall or, some significant colder weather. So
sure, it's all based on the weather pattern then.
And then also, I mean, every year it seems like the birds are pushing north earlier. They're wintering, farther north. Kansas actually winters more birds, snow geese in the midwinter survey than Texas does now in the last several years. So these birds every year just seem to keep kind of pushing further north. So.
Sure. Is that why the season starts mid-February?
We're not necessarily limited on the number of days, but it's kind of a reasonable approach. We kind of want to give hunters as much opportunity as possible. We certainly want them to be able to, once snow geese show up, we certainly want them to be able to go out and harvest those birds. So it's kind of a reasonable, it's a wide swath, we're definitely kind of early most years, but we want people to be ready to go if they do show up. So
when does the season end, Andy?
This year the season is going to end on May 13th. So typically, most years we still have a few birds, mostly like smaller groups of juvenile birds still hanging around in the state. So, there could be some harvest opportunities all the way up until May. So, especially in the northern reaches of the state. Peak migration typically in North Dakota occurs from mid to late March and sometimes into early April.
It's just light geese?
Just light geese are open to the conservation order. Hunters should be aware of some non-target species that might be, intermingling with snow geese out there. One in particular is our white-fronted geese, like to migrate with snow geese. And they can look pretty similar too. So, especially those blue-faced snow geese can look kind of similar to some of those white-fronted geese in those flocks. So, hunters should just be aware that there could be some other goose species out there while hunting.
Are their migrations typically the same in the spring as they are in the fall?
Typically, the spring migration through North Dakota is a little further to the east. So birds will come up through the state in the kind of the southeast corner in that Dickey, Sargent County area, and they'll kind of come up through Jamestown, between Jamestown and Valley City, and from there they'll kind of split off. They'll either go straight north or maybe kind of tail to the northwest to say Minot, but they're basically gonna kind of spread out in a triangle from there, basically to hit further staging areas, in southwestern Manitoba or central Saskatchewan.
Once the season starts, the Game and Fish Department's going to have what we call a snow goose hotline.
Yep, we'll have a snow goose hotline that hunters can call in. We also have that information available on our department website as well. So, basically those are just kind of general updates on the migration.
Right, it's not going to tell you exactly where to go. It's just going to give you a general idea as when the birds are in the state, where they're at in the state, and so forth.
Yep, general information, and a lot of these snow goose hunters too, I think, are using Facebook and other social media outlets to kind of track the migration as well. So those are good resources. And
in the spring, regulations are a little different than in the fall. What are some of those regulations that are different in the spring?
Yeah, the conservation order is, specifically designed to reduce the population of light geese. So with that comes some special provisions in the conservation order, such as electronic calls, unplugged shotguns, extended shooting hours, so you can hunt a half an hour after sunset. There's no bag limit, there's no possession limit. So it's really designed to kind of, reduce populations of light geese. We're using hunters as the tools to do that. So,
how about resident and non-resident licenses? What do they need for the spring?
Well, residents they need to be licensed to hunt small game in the state, and just to be aware, they need that license ends on March 31st every year. So if they plan on hunting snow geese into April, they'll need to renew that license for that year. And then we also have a special non-resident license that's $50. It'll cover hunters for the whole conservation order, and it won't affect your status for the following fall as far as the number of days you've hunted in North Dakota. So it's just a special license for non-residents for the conservation order. And then the other thing, residents are non-resident hunters. They're not required to have a federal duck stamp. So
one thing you have to do is HIP register.
Yep, absolutely. So your HIP in North Dakota will essentially expire at the end of the calendar year. So if you if you hunted birds last fall, your HIP number is going to expire. So if you plan on hunting light geese this spring, you need to register for HIP again for this year. So
a lot of good information, Andy. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike.
For more information on the Spring Light Goose Conservation Order that opens February 17th and continues through May 13th, go to the Game and Fish website at gf.nd.gov. For waterfowl biologist Andy Dingus and the rest of the staff here at the Game and Fish Department, thanks for joining us this week for Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.